Thank you for tuning into this, the fourth section of the sequence of events for the tribulation. We're going to pick up where we left off, and this is the beginning of the tribulation. We're now in the first half, and we're at point number 13. The two witnesses begin their ministry, and this is Revelation 11, verses 1 through 6. Now, the two witnesses perform their duties during the first half of the 7 years. I have placed this point and the next 2 points in this location because the 144,000 have just been sealed, and because the next point, point number 14, is the 7 angels prepare to sound. Now, these angels respond to the prayers of the two witnesses, which we read about in Revelation 11, verses 10, because when the angels sound, the judgments occur. Now, let's take a look at the timing, which is the first half. Daniel 9:27 and Revelation 11, verses 2 and 3 provide the necessary information to determine that the ministry of the two witnesses must be during the first half of the 7 years. The signing of the covenant initiates the 7 years, and the sacrifice is terminated in the middle. This is Daniel 9:26 and 27. The temple has worshipers during the first half of the 7 years. And you see this in Revelation 11, verse 2. The witnesses' ministry includes the restoration of temple worship, which we understand to be part of all things from Matthew 17:11. Therefore, their ministry must be during the first half of the 7 years. Now, Scripture is silent regarding the exact beginning of their 1260 days. During their witness, Gentiles do not have access to the temple proper. Only the outer court, perhaps as part of the covenant. In Revelation 11, verse 1 says, "And those who worship in it." Let's take a look at their ministry. Their ministry is twofold. First portion of their ministry is a restoration of the Israelite family and all things Mosaic. This is Malachi 4, verses 5 through 6, and Matthew 17:11. And we read down here, "He will restore the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse." And then Jesus states plainly, Elijah is coming and will restore all things. The second part of their ministry is judgment to the world. And we see this in Revelation 11, verses 6 and verse 10. Revelation 6, they have the power to shut up the sky, they have the power over the waters to turn them into blood, and to strike the earth with every plague. And Revelation 11:10, these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. Let's look at their authority. The two witnesses initiate the first 6 trumpet judgments, which include 2 plagues, and humanity recognizes this in Revelation 11, verse 10. Everybody was rejoicing because these two witnesses were dead, because these two witnesses were calling down plagues on us. The authority to create droughts and turn water into blood is specified in Revelation 11, verse 6. But this is the only place that droughts are mentioned. They also have the authority to smite the earth with every plague. Let's look at the categories of the plagues. And the first question is, why the gods of Egypt? It is commonly taught that there is a similarity between the plagues of Egypt and the plagues of the tribulation. And we'll discuss that in a minute when it comes to the identity, because they use that to say that's one of the reasons it's Moses. But the plagues of Egypt are commonly understood to be against the gods of Egypt. So we can actually ask the question, why would God concern himself with the gods of Egypt in the 21st century? And the solution is that he doesn't. The plagues of the tribulation fit a much tighter pattern that conforms to the categories in Revelation 14:7. Revelation 14:7 is the gospel of the kingdom being preached by an angel to the world just before the end of the 7 years. Okay? And the message is this: "And worship him who made the heavens and the earth and the seas and the springs of water." There's one more observation here. The Mosaic method of capital punishment for cursing God or blaspheming was stoning. That's in Leviticus 24, verses 14 to 16. The asteroid strike of the second trumpet and the repetitive mentioning of hail conforms to this. And if you want, you can go to Joshua chapter 10, verse 11 in the Old Testament for an example of what will occur during the tribulation. In it, you can see that the Lord threw large stones from heaven. Now let's look at the identification of God's two witnesses. And I use Malachi 4:5 and Matthew 17:11. Some commentators have stated that one of the two witnesses of Revelation 11 must be Moses, because the plagues during the tribulation match those in the book of Exodus. They don't even come close, really. As the plagues of Egypt and the plagues of the tribulation are not related, then the assumption that Moses must be one of the two witnesses, now based on that reason, is rejected. Now remember, how you arrive at the correct answer is as important as having the correct answer. This is going to be high school math. If you can't work out the problem right, you don't get credit. Scripture is clear that one of the witnesses is Elijah, based upon Matthew 17, verses 1 through 8. Now this is the Mount of Transfiguration. The other witnesses is most likely Moses. Now, who better to restore Mosaic law and Mosaic worship than Moses himself? And finally, in contrast, if the mission of these two witnesses is to restore Israel, then how could a pre-flood Enoch or a church-age saint accomplish that task? They're the wrong people. And finally, we look at the irony of their ministry. There is irony here. The two witnesses released their own murderer. Moses and Elijah released their own murderer. The two witnesses are the ones who direct the sounding of the fifth trumpet. And with the fifth trumpet, the demon, Apollyon, the destroyer, is released from the abyss. Now this demon then possesses a human, the Antichrist, the Assyrian, who then later kills the two witnesses at the end of their ministry. The 14th point. The seven angels prepare to sound. Well, I have placed this point here because the angels sound their judgments in response to the prayers of the two witnesses we just talked about. Now this verse is additional evidence for the purely sequential method of interpretation. The seventh seal includes the giving of the trumpets to the angels, but it terminates with an earthquake. Only then, in the text, does it say that the angels prepare to sound. Number 15. The two witnesses begin the drought that will last the 3.5 years of their ministry. Now this could be a localized drought in Israel alone, or it could be global. In either case, droughts cause famines, and famines cause death. Today, Israel is a major exporter of fruits and vegetables around the world. Even a local drought in Israel will have global effects. Excuse me. Now, Revelation 11, verse 6a says, "These have the power to shut up the sky in order that rain may not fall during the days of their prophesying." The phrase, "during the days of their prophesying," is the key to the start and the duration of this drought. This drought starts the day that they do, and it lasts for 3.5 years until the day they are killed. Global conflict begins, number 16. We get this from Matthew 24:7. Jesus states that global conflict will occur during the first half of the tribulation in Matthew 24, verses 7 and 8. Now, bear in mind, Revelation 6, chapters 6 through 16, the judgments, only address divine judgments. There is no mention of human warfare in those judgments. I know you've been taught differently. Just bear with me. But for now, there is a curious tension that we need to address. The seventh king of Revelation 17:10 reigns during the first half of the 7 years and has a kingdom over the kings of the earth, But apparently he is not authoritative enough to keep the kings of the earth from fighting each other. Now, the conflict that occurs during the first half could include economic sanctions, Cold War, terrorism, hot war, or any combination of all four, or all four at the same time among all the nations of the world. Number 17, temple worship begins. Now, most commentators, including myself, we've been assuming that the tribulation temple must be a brick and mortar building. And this isn't necessarily true. Israel worshipped at the at the tabernacle, a small tent, for 480 years. Now, John Whitcomb, in his article on the Pre-Trib website, recognized that Joshua and Zerubbabel initiated the post-Babylonian worship with only an altar. And his article is called The Two Witnesses, First or Second Half of the Tribulation. That's on the Pre-Trib website. Number 18, the first trumpet. The two witnesses pray, and the first angel sounds his trumpet. Let's look at the effects. As a rhetorical question, how hot does it have to be in order to burn all of the grass but only 1/3 of the trees? Agriculture, and by extension the entire food chain over 1/3 of the earth, will be destroyed. Again, famine would follow. Now, on top of this, there would be extensive death immediately due to the fire and the hail. Sodom and Gomorrah and the plagues of Egypt are excellent Old Testament examples of this. 1/3 of the earth's surface is destroyed. Well, let's go ahead and compare that to the fourth seal. This is different from the fourth seal. In the fourth seal, we recognize that the rider is death, and he has authority to kill by multiple methods over 1/4 of the earth's surface. But famine is only one of those methods. Here, the food chain is destroyed over 1/3 of the earth's surface by a single event. The two witnesses pray again, and the second angel sounds his trumpet. This is a meteorite from heaven, and it hits a sea or an ocean somewhere. This is a meteorite impact on one of the oceans. The resulting tidal wave will kill anyone living along a coast in its path. Dust darkens the sky while the ejecta falls back to the earth, causing additional damage. Excuse me. And we'll go ahead and read this. The second angel sounded, and something like a great burning mountain with fire was thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became blood, 1/3 of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. This is a huge event. Trumpet number 3. The two witnesses pray, and the third angel sounds his trumpet. Now, whether this bitterness, this wormwood, is radioactivity, as some have suggested, or some form of poison, the effect is real and physical. Whoever drinks the water dies. Now, the words wormwood and poison are used together in Jeremiah 9:15 and Jeremiah 23:15 as well. Excuse me. Number 21. The two witnesses pray, and the fourth angel sounds his trumpet. Darkness. Space is obscured. 1/3 equals 8 time zones. This is 1/3 of the entire planet of the earth is darkened. Now, this is probably a natural darkness caused by the smoke and the debris in the atmosphere from the asteroid strike and from the first several trumpets. Now, this is in contrast. This is a huge contrast from the fifth vial, which is a supernatural darkness over Babylon and the kingdom of the beast alone. That one, the fifth vial, is much more like the one that occurred in Egypt. The fifth trumpet, the first woe, locusts for 5 months. the two witnesses pray, and the fifth angel sounds his trumpet. What happens? Lucifer opens the abyss. Let's look at Revelation 9:1. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven, which had fallen to the earth, and the key to the bottomless pit, that is the abyss, was given to him. And Isaiah 14:12 identifies him, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. The Greek text is clear regarding the one who opens the abyss. He is the star out of heaven who has fallen to the earth. And this description matches the description for Satan in Isaiah 14:12. Now we learn from Revelation 1:18 that Jesus is the possessor of the keys to death and Hades. Thus, Jesus must loan the keys to Lucifer, Satan, for the purpose of opening the abyss. Now they must be returned to Jesus, because later those same keys are given to a different angel who then imprisons Satan in the abyss in Revelation 20 verse 1. I would suggest that this does not appear to be the time when Satan is finally and fully cast out of heaven. Now Satan does not give the beast his authority until 44 days before the middle of the 7 years. Here we are at the beginning of the fifth trumpet, a judgment that lasts at least 5 months, or that's 150 days, and we haven't gotten to the sixth trumpet yet either. Now Walvoord has some issues. Walvoord also recognizes that Lucifer opens the abyss, and that's on page 159 of his commentary. And he writes, "It would seem likely, therefore, that the person referred to as the star is none other than Satan himself." Sounds easy enough. However, later he reveals his own confusion when he declares that it is Satan who comes up out of the abyss. And that's on page 181 of his commentary. And I'm going to read an extended passage here. "According to verse 7, the beast from the bottomless pit, which is none other than Satan himself, makes war against them and overcomes them and kills them. Of interest is the fact that this is the first of 36 references of Revelation to the beast, not to be confused with the living creatures of chapter 4. That's a non sequitur. But here it is. The beast out of the pit is Satan." He continues, "The beast out of the sea is the world dictator," 13:1. "The beast out of the land is the false religious leader of the day, the false prophet. This unholy trinity is the satanic counterfeit of the divine Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." The point of this passage is, on 2 locations within this passage, he not only indicates that Satan is the one that opens the abyss, he then says Satan is the one who comes out of the abyss. He's confused. He can't be both. The beast that comes out of the abyss has a name, and it is not Satan. It is given in that passage. It is in Abaddon in Hebrew and Apollyon in Greek. This demon is the destroyer. Let's look at the event. Excuse me. Revelation 9 verses 2 and 3. The opening of the abyss results in real smoke and darkness that darkens the sun and the sky, and it releases real locusts. Now the description of the locusts is strange, which has caused commentators to go off the deep end trying to describe these things. But biologists are constantly finding new creatures everywhere on this planet to this very day. So the fact that we have this description doesn't mean that they're not real locusts. But these are spiritually discerning locusts, because they do not attack those with the seal of God. This is a great sign to unbelievers, as believers are not attacked. But this also makes it easy for the persecutors to identify who the believers are. Look around and see who's not being attacked. The flow of the text suggests that this 5-month period ends before the 6th trumpet begins. No one dies from this. And this event contrasts with the first vial judgment, where with the first vial, those who have the mark are the ones who are affected. Excuse me. Now we're going to look at this beast, number 23. This is the demon beast, that is the destroyer. He ascends out of the abyss. And I'm adding this as a separate event because we need to deal with who this individual is. The angel of the abyss is released with the locusts. He is their king. He is Apollyon the destroyer. He ascends and possesses the human Antichrist before the midpoint of the 7 years. He possesses the Assyrian human. The Assyrian, the Antichrist, is a possessed Assyrian human being. Let's look at his identification. In Revelation 16:13, we learn that the beast is a human-demon combination. He's a possessed human. The demon who ascends out of the abyss possesses the Assyrian, and they together are the Antichrist. Again, we look at his physical heritage. The human who is possessed will be a Gentile of Assyrian descent. Isaiah 10:24, Isaiah 31:8, Micah 5:5 and 6. Our Revelation judgments. Revelation 11 verse 7 is proof that the first beast of Revelation 13 must be the angel of the abyss in Revelation 9:11, and he cannot be the rider of the horse in the first seal of Revelation 6:2. This was Walter's error. He saw the first beast of Revelation 13 and the rider of the first horse as the same individual. He then shoves all the judgments into the second half. Okay? But because the individual who possesses, the demon who possesses the Assyrian comes out of the pit at the fifth trumpet, he can't be on the first horse. He cannot be part of the first seal and then later ascend out of the abyss at the fifth trumpet. The rider of the first seal and the demon of the fifth trumpet must be two different individuals. Number 4, by demise. Who is this individual? And we can identify him in a number of passages based on the way Scripture identifies his death. Okay? First, he is the Assyrian of Isaiah 31:8, who will fall by a sword not of man. He is the little horn of Daniel 7:11, who is given to the burning fire. In Daniel chapter 8, in the King James, he's called the King of Fierce Countenance, who is broken without human agency. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, he is the man of sin, the son of perdition, and the lawless one. The issue here is son of perdition. He is the 8th king of Revelation 17:11 who goes to destruction. He is the beast of Revelation 19:20 who is thrown into the lake of fire. Now let's look at some symbolism. His identification by symbolism. In Revelation 13 the symbolism of Revelation 13:2 requires that the beast be of Middle Eastern origin. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like that of a lion. These 3 animals mentioned in this verse are the same 3 used in Daniel 7, although they are listed in reverse order. They represent Greece, Medo-Persia, and Babylon. Now 2 of these are Middle Eastern, and the third, Greece, while it is Southeastern Europe, when they became a world power, they did so by conquering the Middle East. The 4th beast of Daniel 7 is absent. And in Daniel chapter 7, the reference to iron with that beast is the basis for assuming it is a reference to Rome. But the point we're going to make here is this. To apply characteristics, i.e. these 3 guys, leopard, lion, and bear, to apply these characteristics of these kingdoms to a Roman Antichrist is to ignore their most important characteristic, and that is geographic area. The Middle Eastern origin of this beast makes it impossible for other commentators to identify him as the Antichrist due to their previous acceptance of a single 7-year Roman Antichrist. And this is a really big problem for folks trying to interpret Daniel chapter 8. Because when we're going through Daniel chapter 8, that passage focuses on a Middle Eastern individual. And that is why there are so many attempts creative attempts to interpret or reinterpret what is a plain prophecy in Daniel 8 for a Middle Eastern individual. Now let's look at some of his other titles. And this isn't comprehensive, but he's the little horn of Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. He's the desolator of Daniel 9:27. Desolator is a person, not the statue. He is the willful king of Daniel 11:36. He is the beast of Revelation 13:1 through 10, 16:13 through 14, and he is the beast that the harlot sits on in Revelation 17. Let's look at his wound. 3 times. 3 times. In Revelation 13 we are told that this beast has a wounded head. That's verses 3, 12, and 14. Zechariah 11:17 confirms that his right eye will be blind and that one of his arms will be withered. His history. Revelation 17 verses 10 and 11. Now Revelation 17 is a history of this demon's activities. It is impossible for a single human being to have historically been this active spanning so many empires because of Hebrews 9:27. Hebrews 9:27 tells us, inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment. Okay? Therefore, this demon was the spiritual authority behind 6 historical kingdoms: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And the first 5 had fallen, and Rome was still in power. Now, adding a little note here, Isaiah 52:4 had me curious for a while until I realized this. Isaiah 52:4 indicates that it was the Assyrian who oppressed Israel while they were in Egypt. And for a while I was wondering, does that mean that the current Pharaoh was Assyrian in origin? It didn't make sense. But now we understand, because the demon that we call the Assyrian and is being identified for us in that passage was the demon who was possessing the Pharaoh at the time. We'll look at 80 years before the Exodus, when the order was given to kill all the babies. Now at the time of the writing of the book of Revelation, which is right about 80-90, the beast is not. Thus, he is not during the church age, and we're going to argue from the specific to the general here. This means that after being the authority behind Rome for an indeterminate period of time, the demon, the destroyer, was banished to the abyss before John wrote. And this demon, even today in the church age, is currently in the abyss. At the sounding of the 5th trumpet, this demon ascends and possesses an Assyrian Gentile. He becomes the 8th king and rules during the last half of the 7 years. And afterwards, he is thrown live into the lake of fire. Now we're going to stop this video here for time and duration purposes. Because we've still got many pages to go. We're going to start dealing with, in the opening of the next video, we're going to again be dealing with the beast who ascends out of the abyss. And the next section is to deal with his religion. Thank you for tuning in.